Or the smoke watchers how to quit book. Part 1, The Tobacco Habit. Alexander the Great remarked once that never attacked on an enemy before understanding him. The dictum applies perfectly for the attack of the bout with the launch of the against your smoking habit. One of the major reasons smoking failure to defeat the habit is the failure to first understand it thoroughly. The tobacco habit. Before you tackle the cigarette habit with a sensible scientific effect of the way, you're first going to understand it thoroughly. Strange fact is, most of the smokers don't. When typical smokers worry about his habit of a lot. Cigarettes, however himself over it. Castigates himself over it and feels a sort of unpleasant emotions such as guilt and shame over his failure with the defeat, wondering when he can't, and thinking maybe he has less willpower than other people, and gloomy chasing of the elusive subject down in the corridors of the mind for the 10,000 times, lights another cigarette with the comfort himself and simply never understand his habit to really understand it. The smoke watchers have been taken hundreds of smokers through the first step of the understanding of the habit as you watch their face register surprise, sometimes outright amazement. Habit is actually very easy to understand, but the most smokers had apparently never looked at it in the right way or from the right angle. It may have been a mystery throughout the smoking life. They may have thought the mystery could unravel only by a psychiatrist. George L. and Mrs. Carol S. were two smokers in their mid-30s who chanced to meet with the smokers' watcher gathering in Fairfield, Connecticut. Let's examine the separate paths of their lives, see if there are similarities, where and if any made with the two-path cover in the room with all the other smokers of the night with the in Fairfield. George L. has tasted his first cigarette as a teenager of the Chicago suburbs, Winquette, Illinois. He was first 15 years old at the time. Like all adolescents, he is having some of the trouble in becoming an adult. The transition from the child was not easy, afflicting him with the familiar emotional problems that have the trouble of teenagers throughout the history of human civilization. He had the feeling, probably erroneous, that he was less grown up and sophisticated than many of the high school friends. His anxious impressive that have the manhood, particularly girls, and most particularly a gorgeous blonde creature whose name he couldn't immediately recall when he first began reminiscing for us. What was her name? Oh yes, Jennifer. The beautiful Jennifer, since disappeared with the mist of eternity. She was important to George at the time. At a party one warm spring night by shore of the lake, George was beginning to make a lot of time with Jennifer. The group had been swimming in the afternoon, had a picnic supper, and now, as far as star came out, some of the couples were petting, and others were talking about trying to buy some beer from a man they knew. George had been taking Jennifer aside when we were kissing and everything, I was trying to get up the nerve to, I actually didn't know what to do next, how to proceed. I'm unsure myself, the nervous, typical kid. In a typical situation, George was frustrated, relieved at the same time when the older boy came up to him and Jennifer and made some kind of sexy wisecrack. Jennifer replied with a wisecrack of her own. George, who couldn't think of it any smarter and sophisticated to say, merely stood there and grinned foolishly, felt painfully young. The older boy was smoking a cigarette. Jennifer, who was probably relieved that George was petting, session had ended and asked for a cigarette. The older boy gave her one and then offered it. The pack to George. I never tried to smoke before, but now I was kind of a trap. I had to prove my manhood. You see, I felt if I refused the damn cigarette, I'd never be able to face Jennifer again. So I took the cigarette and smoked it. He tried to smoke it the way he had seen Humphrey Bogart do it in movies. He didn't inhale. He tried to ape all the other Bogart mannerisms. Humphrey Bogart was one of the cigarettes industry's leading salesmen. He didn't intend it to be, but what he was. He could make a minor dramatic explode out of lighting a cigarette. Sometimes he would light one, then give it to Lauren Bacall. The audience was encouraged to presume the next stop was bad. The acting smoking cigarette had all qualities of sexual foreplay for the movie industry, which in those days was not allowed to show real sex except the most remotely symbolic forms. Made the most allowable kind of sex, but not sex. Impressionable youngsters may have been harmed much as less the actor or actress that have been shown naked in bed together, but the public values are not always entirely sensible this way in the way of the nation. Wanted to Humphrey Bogart smoking the cigarette was all of the man, tough and hard-boiled, sophisticated, unquestionable man with the archetype of the modern urban manhood. And George L. smoked his first cigarette and tried to look back with a hard-boiled, private eye with the hope that Jennifer was impressed, though he didn't inhale. The smoke made him cough and burned in his mouth and nose and made his eyes water. His body was trying to tell him something, but of course he paid no attention. Over the next few months, he practiced smoking in front of the mirrors until he got the hang of it, and from then on, throughout his adolescence, he smoked whenever he wanted to look and feel an adult male. About the same time, George L. was going through not unusual adventure with a girl who later became Mrs. Carol S., who was learning to smoke like George. She tried the first cigarette in high school. She was with a group of the 4 girls in the car of the movie parking lot. One of the girls had a pack of cigarettes that she had brought with a coin-operated machine. She suggested that they all try smoking, and that was a lot of giggling. Carol called their salt. She tried reconstructing the episode first, and lots of hesitation. I don't think any one of us really wanted to do it. Somehow the whole thing turned into a dare. You know, the high school girls are. They hate to be different. They go to be. They've got to be one of the bunch. Being a member of the group, desperately important thing at that age. I didn't want to go to ostracized for the group, even from one silly night. So I went along and with a dare and smoked. She was then a senior in high school, and she smoked about 4 cigarettes a week from the unusual until graduation, never really enjoying the act of the smoking, merely maintained what she was felt in her position in the group, and also because using cigarettes was a way of secretly defying grown-up world. I got along well with my parents and the teachers in school, other adults, but well, you know how it is with the kid. I felt I was more than adult than they thought. I had to rebel in some quiet way. Every kid does, I suppose, smoking the one cigarette in the back of the movie down in the local soda store. Every Saturday night there was a way of defying adults, showing that I had my own life and could run it myself. It seemed harmless, like kind of the defiance at the time, and after I asked myself, who am I hurting? But she didn't really like cigarettes. When summer vacation arrived that year, her high school gang dispersed, and she did not smoke all summer and felt no need to even a remote wish to smoke. Then she went to college in Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. Like most of all college girls, she considered herself to have crossed the threshold of the full adulthood. She and other girls in the dorms were no longer living with their parents, and they were on their own, independent in the world, had now issued them a license to chart their own course through life. My girls in the dorms smoked, and they smoked as they talked of their adult concerns, sex, marriage, careers, religion, politics. It was an exhilarating experience full of age adults last, and smoking somehow seemed to be part of the experience, tangled up with the ways that nobody ever stopped to explain, but seemed no need to explanation. Something simply existed, and that's all, and it was there, and it was something he did. Carol began to smoke again very light with this sophomore year. First time she smoked only among the girls in the dorm and on the dates of the night. She's still not practically enjoying smoking itself, but enjoying the sense of adult companionship that she seemed to go along with it in the beginning, the sense of the companionship of the groupness. She called it simply excited, but the side-to-side smoking. Later, smoking seemed to create a sense of fellowship, feeling being in the group gradually. And I got to the point I felt it was ill at ease among people if I didn't have cigarettes. Cigarettes gave a feeling of security and kind. I didn't analyze what was happening at the time. Of course, I guess nobody does. I simply drifted along and let the cigarettes get more and more tangled up in my life. Meanwhile, George L. had been in and out of the U.S. Navy when starting with a careers account with cigarette smoking had started for him as an actual proof of his manhood in the Navy. He had gradually increased his cigarette consumption, but then it was not because of the growing need to prove himself. Perhaps this need or vestige still existed somewhere in the subconscious mind, but it was not needed any more as it had been in his adolescence. He knew he was a man, and so he did it everybody else. He had grown into the muscular 6 foot, impressively bright, well supplied with woman friends who had given him repeated assurances of his vitality. It was not necessary to smoke before them. He had felt with the case of Jennifer in order to prove himself, nor was it necessary to smoke before his Navy shipmates. He knew this, and yet he smoked more each year. For smoking, had not become a habit, and first he smoked with his pistol, specifically later regained his honor over the men who felt that he was threatened. Then he had smoked automatically in mixed group to defend his honor before it was threatened. He had the smoke in all groups, then he had smoked whenever he was nervous or worried about anything. In any situation, he finally drifted into the pattern, smoking all day long. There was no longer a particular reason for pulling out any particular cigarette in the long days changed. Each cigarette seemed to give some vague comfort, even if there was no specific problem. He knew the comfort about the smoking had become little more than instead of the half-voluntary reflex action, one hand over the shirt pocket for the cigarette pack, the other hand in the pants pocket for a lighter. Click, click, the deeper drag, every hour, every half hour, every 20 minutes. By the time he was 30, he married and making plans with his own public accounting firm. George L. was smoking well over 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He was worried about it. He detected some faintly frightening signs of the failure in his own robust body, but he couldn't walk up the flight of stairs without panting. He had a chronic cough. He was fatigued at the end, and 2 packs for the day. He was even losing interest in sex. When he went to bed at night, his wise wife was unusually tired to do more than groan, roll over, fall asleep, and smoke irritated respiratory passages being clogged with mucus, snore, none of these with contributing success of his marriage irony. Or it gave him the sour bit of amusement he had started with smoking because of sex. Now he was quitting sex because of smoking. On 3 separate occasions, he tried to give the cigarettes. For the longest he was able to go without them was a period of 4 days. He was able to feel great for the first day and decided to quit. He told us with full enthusiasm, proud of myself. You know, I'd look at the other guys smoking with the train around the office, and I think, lily-livered bastards, they were weak. But only on the second day I woke up and think, oh Christ, how am I going to get through another day without cigarettes? What will I do with myself? And the craving would go and get worse and worse, and finally I'd think, well, I'd just have one with the morning coffee, and then I'd have another, and pretty soon I'd admit myself I'd failed again. Carol suddenly found herself hooked on cigarettes, and at the time she got to college, she started smoking in the groups. Now she was smoking alone as well. I heard the feeling of cigarettes help and think. Smoking when I was reading and writing in my reports essays in college, it seemed like an adult kind of thing to do. I don't know what I mean. I made life seem well serious. I helped take myself seriously. It made me feel important. Although I could stop smoking any time I wanted. Of course, I was wrong. Alright, Carol married in age 24, and her husband was a very heavy smoker, sometimes reaching a level of 3 packs a day. So after the first child was born, developed peptic ulcer, his doctor ordered him flatly to stop smoking, pointing out that his life could convincingly depend on whether he did or not. Carol, badly scared, made a pact with her husband that they would stop smoking together. It was fair, since Carol recalled later, I guess we both honored our pact on the first day or 2, but we had our separate life with the lead. He'd go to the job every morning. I'd be home with the baby on the afternoon of the second day. I guess it was maybe the third. I couldn't stand craving any longer, so I put the baby in the carriage, walked 6 or 7 blocks to the drugstore, brought back a pack of cigarettes. I sat at the lunch counter, bought a cup of coffee, lit it up, and oh, it was heaven. And I walked up out to the drugstore with disgust of myself, and I threw away the pack away. But I was back twice the next day, and the day after was smoking in front of the open windows at the home, and the fan was going. My husband wouldn't smell the smoke at night. I was ashamed of myself, but I didn't feel anything I could do about it. Then I weakened my husband and bless him. Then that weekend, my husband, bless him, admitted to him that he had broken the pact too. He had smoking on his job, and I fell into the arms and cried. I was happy but sad too. The habit had both trapped. George L. smoking, his worries about smoking continued to increase. When his 34th, the chest x-ray showed him a faint spot in the right lung. In a retake, the x-ray picture he spotted and failed to show up. It was just a photographic error, the doctor told him, and all of the same, I'd like to think he was scared for you a little bit, but you really ought to stop smoking, he added. George was scared, all right, I tell you, but he's scared witless, and he tried once again to quit smoking, but he couldn't make it. Carol's ex-husband rushed to the hospital one night with an ulcer hemorrhaging, and he could not smoke in the hospital, but as soon as the valency of home he was smoking again, couldn't determine to give up cigarettes herself and encouraged him to follow, but she lasted only a day and a half. George L. and Mrs. Carroll S. both ended up smoke watchers, meeting they needed help. Neither understood the tobacco habit.